Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Total Biscuit. I'm here to ask and answer one simple question. But you have is train fever. It's a horrible disease that's affecting sub-Saharan Africa. Although it is also a simulator of creating your own transport company. It's by a group called Urban Games, fairly small developer. And if you think perhaps this looks a little bit like Transport Tycoon, that's because it does. Along with other games like Railroads, Railroad Tycoon, and things like that. Let's have a look at the settings menu before we dive in. That's what the settings menu looks like. Nothing too crazy or out of the ordinary here. Bear in mind, this is a management game, although it is rendered in full 3D, as you can see in the background there. Although the game doesn't look quite as good as that screenshot, I have to say. I haven't found an area of the game that looks that nice. But, it's not a terrible looking game regardless. So, I don't think there's really much to say here when it comes to management game. Is there anything missing? I don't know. What do you want out of a management game? I assume functional graphics? Yep, it's got those. Okay, cool. We're good. Let's check it. Audio settings. Separate sliders for everything. Turn off music and menu music if you so desire. You then have controls, although it doesn't allow you to rebind any of the hotkeys. There aren't, as far as I can tell, a huge number of hotkeys, but it's hard to tell because the game's tutorials are not very comprehensive. And then advanced, which has nothing outside of set crash reports. So, yeah, it's not much of an advanced menu, is it? Okay, so there's basically one game mode, and I can show you the setup here before I dive into one of my games that I've actually spent at least, I think, 8 hours on, so I'm pretty far into it. So you can pick world size, terrain type, difficulty, and your starting year. Once you start the game, you'll only be able to start in 1850, and you'll only be able to move on to 1900 and 1950 once you've reached them in your first game. So if you want to start future games in a year that's not 1850, where the only two vehicles you seem to have are a rubbish train and a horse and cart, then you have the option to do that, but you can't do it immediately. And to be honest, that's probably for the best. It's nice to get a little bit of a feel for it. I'd also make a small suggestion. Don't pick medium or hilly. Pick flat. Because creating train lines in this game on hilly terrain is a nightmare. And we'll talk a little bit more about that and I'll actually demonstrate it to you once we get into the game. Alright. Let's load up. Alright, we have a lot of autosaves. A lot of autosaves. I suppose this would be the most up-to-date. 1952. Yes, indeed. Alright. So let's jump into Train Fever and see what's going on here. I should preface this by saying that I very much enjoyed Transport Tycoon Deluxe and then dabbled a little bit in OpenTTD as well. It was actually one of my favorite games for a very, very long time. I'd say that it still is to this day. And surprisingly enough, the open source version, OpenTTD, holds up very well to this day. So it's a tough mountain to climb if you happen to be a new transport game. Alright, here we are. So we are now inside Train Fever, and you might notice that the game jerks and jumps around a bit. That's because the frame rate is highly variable. It's not unusual for a large-scale management game, especially when you zoomed out all the way. Now, if you want to lower the frame rate, there you go. But you will definitely notice as you zoom in, it's loading in assets, it's taking a little while. But there's a surprising amount of detail here. For instance, you see a lot of people wandering around the place, and these do actually represent people that can end up at a bus stop. So, if we have a look at this, there are 20 people. I assume that's 20. I'm not going to sit there and count. But it claims, hey, yeah, there's 20 people at this bus station. We zoom out, we can go over here, and we'll find even more just waiting at this bus stop. Surprising amount of detail, and all of these cars on the road as well. Admittedly, there are not that many. If I lived in a town where there were only this many cars, I think I'd be a very happy person. But the cars themselves are simulated, they go to different places, and they will also, of course, cause traffic congestion, or they do have a tendency to vanish. I assume this has probably got something to do with the fact that they have reached the place they want to go, and it just makes the car vanish at the time. So that car probably went in here, and that's that. They don't simulate anything like garages when it comes to that stuff. Let's see, I want to buy a wonderful, I think it's a Mercedes Omnibus, actually, that I have there. Alright. So what is it all about? Well, it's about building a successful transport company. Again, sounds a lot like OpenTTD, right? Yeah, it does. You can start by building some very basic trucks. And I say trucks because what I really mean is horse and cart that will carry goods around. You can also create stagecoaches and a very, very basic train. Incredibly slow, very expensive, generally not worth it. As you go through the game, you will advance in years, and that means you will gain access to more advanced vehicles. I want to show you an advanced vehicle. We can head down to the bottom of the map as it chugs along. And I believe under the ground right there, we actually have a train. Now, you can't really see it in the camera there because that's a massive tunnel that I carved out of this mountain. And I can talk a little bit about how that works in a minute. I'm just going to accelerate the process so that this train actually gets out. Oh, I still have one of those old chuggers. We need to certainly deal with that eventually. You're probably noticing some likenesses to Transport Tycoon, even in the aspect of popping up little sort of pseudo-news reports at the bottom of the screen and having the individual windows. But there you go, that's something that's a little bit advanced. That is an electric train. Of course, that is an electrified rail. And that's a rail that I ran all the way down the bottom of the map. Very, very expensive project. I think it cost me about $35 million of tweaking and all sorts of nonsense like that. But outside of the train tracks, you're going to be building vehicles, and those vehicles are going to be, well, doing vehicle-y things. So let's build a vehicle and show you exactly how that works. So if I wanted to buy, and I think we need to start replacing some of the buses in this area, a Mercedes-Benz 6600, that sounds like a pretty good idea. It's a fairly fast bus, it has 15 passenger capacity, which I don't believe is realistic, so if you're looking for the realism there, then you're not going to find it, although you do get, I think, a reasonable amount of realism in the terms of the use of trademarks. I can't imagine that they ask permission for that, but you never know. And frankly, I personally don't care. But outside of that, you've got a little bit of history about each vehicle. This is a weird looker, isn't it? This was introduced in 1924, apparently. It is a top-seater omnibus, and it's damn slow, 25 kilometers per hour. This is a much superior vehicle. So, we bought a vehicle, and now what do? Well, in order to set it in motion, you set it on a line. Now, these are all of the lines that I currently have running in this game. I'm sure there are many people that have much, much more advanced setups, but Gravesend local buses is what I want to set up here, and off it goes. And now it's going to do the line until the end of time, or, of course, until I decide to retire it. There we go. So there's actually no passengers on that bus whatsoever. I can't say I'm doing incredibly well with Gravesend local buses. I really only have that running to kind of support the train line that's here, just so I can make a decent amount of money on it. Now, setting up a line is surprisingly easy, and I can demonstrate it right here. So you click this, and that's going to show you all of the lines. And this is a very handy menu, because it's going to show you also how much the lines are making or not making. My Line 1 train is all busted up. I'll talk about why that is in a minute. I believe my other train is actually doing fine. Oh, no, it's not. It's currently also losing money. I gotta be honest, making money with trains in this game, especially passenger trains, seems to be a little tricky. I've had very little luck with it. I make most of my money through local bus services and things like that. You can see there's a local goods service with actually quite a lot of old vehicles that really need replacing. Two-town bus line here makes $380,000, and I'm up to $62 million, so I've got a decent amount of money in the pocket, although I do have a few of these sort of smaller services that are currently losing money. This one is doing well. This makes $1 million a year, and strangely enough, that was my old local town. I used to live in Spennymoor. I'm not really sure why it's on the map, but if we head over here, according to this randomly generated map, that's Spennymoor. Looks a lot nicer than Spennymoor did, I've got to say, but I'm making a absolute ton of money from Spennymoor, so thanks for that, much appreciated. I probably need to replace some of its crappier buses. But the line system is quite nifty because it lets you see everything at a glance, and it also has a visibility option. So if I zoom in here, I click visible only, and it'll only show me the lines that are visible in this area, which makes managing things so much easier. It's a really nice little feature, very well thought out. Town West local buses are making a ton of money here, as you can see. I believe they do the run between Sale and Kirkby Lonsdale, and they make a good amount of money there. Doing just local bus services is not going to get you anything, but going from town to town makes you a huge amount of money. So that's the way to go with that. But I can add vehicles to this line very easily, as I showed you earlier. I can take vehicles off the line, although it's perhaps a bit fiddlier than it should be. If I want to retire a vehicle, I click it on here, then click line, and then click go to depot. Frankly, that's as far as I'm concerned, that is 2 more clicks than are necessary. What I'd love to see in this menu, and this is a bit of a problem with the interface in general, is it has a lot of unnecessary nonsense going on with it. I'd like to see a drag and drop interface where I was able to just take this and then kind of drag it into a bin, and that would send it back and sell it. As it stands, there are only send all vehicles to depot and sell upon arrival options, which sound great in theory, but if you want to like mass replace a bunch of vehicles, if you send them there to sell and then buy a bunch of new vehicles and send them out on the line, they're all going to go after each other one after another, and it's going to wreck your transport line for months, probably years in game time, simply because you end up with a stack of vehicles, like 6 buses going to the same place at the same time. So there's a fiddly amount of micromanagement. I heard there's some kind of workaround, but I think one of the biggest problems this game has is the fact that it does a really bad job of teaching you anything but the basics. There's a lot of information in this game which is obfuscated or just completely hidden. So let me give you a few examples of that. First example is the fact that later on in the game you unlock a new kind of road, country roads. Yeah? There is no tooltip whatsoever to tell you what country roads actually do or what the difference between streets and country roads is. Not only that, but you realize later on in the game, having only had streets as an option and not getting country roads till later on, that a bunch of your roads and your routes are suddenly now too slow. Because apparently on a street, even if it's a street that goes like from here to here, you are limited to 30 kilometers per hour. So once you get vehicles that can go faster than that, you end up just bottlenecking your own stuff. Now the game never bothers to tell you this, so that's a bit of a problem. You also get the option to upgrade a bus lane at a time, but again, the game never kind of pops something up saying, hey, you now have the ability to build a bus lane. Here's what a bus lane actually does. Now, a bus lane is reasonably self-explanatory, but I don't know if there is a downside to building stuff with bus lanes. It is possible. It may be that, I think there must be a downside, because in theory, if only buses are using this and you're running a lot of trucks along the route as well, there's a possibility for congestion, because you've only got one lane either side. But again, the game doesn't really explain any of that, which is a bit of a problem. Now, it gets worse when we're talking about rail. Now, I believe my train is probably stuck around here somewhere. Here it is. There we go. Okay, is it actually running now? Cool. This train gets consistently stuck at this station, and I don't really know why. As far as I am aware, in fact, I'm almost certain of this, the trains in this game have the ability to automatically turn around at a platform and just go back the other way. So you don't have to worry about having an engine either way. It seems to work fine. I mean, this train right here is running just fine, no problems at all. That train, as soon as I added a third destination to it, gets stuck every now and again here. And I'm not 100% sure why that is. It doesn't really do a good job of explaining the signal system. I've added a few signals in here, and I think it's right, but I don't know. Because again, the game only has these 2 tiny little threadbare tutorials, which tell you how to build a road and how to connect a road line and how to build rail. I don't believe it even explains how to do trams, although I might have potentially missed that. So, how do you build rail? Well, the rail system is a little bit fiddly. It seems like it would make a certain degree of sense, and it allows you to build these really free-form rails, but actually, it's surprisingly restrictive, and the real problem comes in when you are trying to deal with land masses and contours. Now, if you do anything, you've got to turn contour lines on, because if you don't, it's a little bit tricky to really figure out just exactly how steep some of this stuff is. So I've wanted to build rail, and I'm just going to end up wasting a bunch of money here just for your personal entertainment. So this is how you do it. You just kind of drag it out, and you kind of create these nodes. Once you create a node, you can extend it. Now, what I can also do is adjust the height up or down if I so desire. There we go. So we create a bit there, and then we maybe create a curve here, and it's going to show you the speed limit, which is a handy little feature. I like that very much. So trying to make sure that you maintain maximum speed limit, especially with the better trains later on, is important. So we're building, we're building, we're building, we're building. Now, you've noticed that that has kind of automatically extended us around there because of a little bit of height. And then we can go around there. And you can even build some crazy stuff like this. But the costs actually spiral pretty heavily. If you try and make a large amount of rail at any given time, it's probably going to do some pretty wacky things with terrain deformation and putting tunnels where there don't need to actually be tunnels and things like that. So it's going to cost you quite a bit, especially in the early game. I have not found a way to make money with the early game trains. I can't. Not only are the rail lines ludicrously costly, as opposed to the roads, which, one, are pre-built in many areas, or just like kind of halfway, so you just need to extend them. They're perfectly affordable, but rail can be an absolute nightmare, not to mention the fact that rail trains take a huge amount of maintenance, and they cost you a fortune, and don't really run very fast. So I didn't even see the point of that, but when I was building this route down the bottom here, I spent over an hour trying to get this damn route working, because I had problems joining the 2 lines together because it claimed the slope is too extreme. Now, I tried adjusting landmass. I spent millions and millions deforming terrain to try and get it to work. You'll see here is where the original was, and I just had to kind of strip all of this area out eventually. It cost me like $35 million. It was pretty much my entire bank account at this point after playing for like 6 or 7 hours to get that amount of money. And the game does a fairly poor job of telling you what's wrong half the time. It just gives you some fairly vague messages like collision or terrain collision, but it does a bad job of explaining and showing you exactly where that collision is. And often it says things like no route, and I don't know what that actually means when it says that. Obviously, it's like, I can't get there, but I don't know why you can't get there because you don't show me where the problem is. And it makes diagnosis very difficult. I mean, this route right here is now completely busted because of the problems that I had earlier. This route was actually making money, and it took me about 30 years to get this thing to actually make money. Now it doesn't make any money because the trains took too long, and now no one wants to use the train service anymore. And there's no way, as far as I can tell, to really enhance that. In games like Transport Tycoon, if you are having problems, you can invest in things like advertising campaigns, you could build infrastructure in the town. You can't do that in this game. In fact, there's actually a lot you can't do in comparison to its peers, which is a bit of a problem when it comes to content. You'll notice that there are no airports and there are no ships of any description. Yep, the game doesn't have those. It's got trains, trams, and road vehicles. And those road vehicles consist of trucks and buses. And it phases them out as you go forward. I'll show you the selection of trains I currently have. A reasonable number. I still have the Class A4, of course, the Mallard, fastest steam train of all time, and then everything else is a bunch of kind of electric stuff, as you can see here, and nice things like rail buses for light rail and all that kind of stuff. You can even buy separate kinds of wagons, although, yeah, you see the difference here. That one will actually travel at a faster speed, and there's several kinds of passenger car that you can get, and they all have their own maintenance costs, so you can do a little bit of customization there. But outside of that, you're just building some basic road vehicles and occasionally trams, and you're using it to transport a fairly limited number of goods. There's not a huge variety of goods in the game. There's coal, wood, and oil, kind of as raw materials. There's also iron ore, and I think, if I recall correctly, that's it for raw materials. There's nothing else. And outside of that, all you do is you transport generic goods that come from these places. Like the steel mill, it produces goods. Yeah? The oil refinery, right here, yeah, that also produces goods. And it's just a kind of generic thing that towns need. So you move goods into the town and that's it. If you're expecting any kind of supply chain complexity, then that doesn't really exist. What you can do is supply a production facility so much that it gets upgrades and will produce even more. So you can see here that I am shipping a decent amount of both iron ore and coal to this area, to the point where I have a large kind of station where a lot of wagons come in and bring that stuff in. And they make a decent amount of money, and then I ship all the goods out from here to 2 different towns around the area. But frankly, there's not really a lot of complexity to that, really. It doesn't do anything different to any of the other goods places. They just produce a generic box, which is then shipped into towns. So you're focusing on a very small number of areas when it comes to growing your transport business, and you can't really diversify all that much. The best way to make money at the start of the game is find 2 towns, connect a bus service and go, find a production facility, find a supply facility, move the stuff from one to the other, and that really is about it. And you can make some fairly complex lines that go to different places. You'll see this bus line is actually fairly complicated. All of these bus stations, they all visit that. They truck around in a logical area, and if I turn this on, I can even see the routes, which is really nice. I actually like the way that they color code and show you exactly what the route is, because it will change if you move the station, so you can optimize the route. If it's on the wrong side of the road, for instance, you can do something like that. You say, hey, I want to demolish this and maybe put a bus station there. You can do all of that. So in terms of visual representation, this is actually very, very good indeed. And once you get down to sort of the ground level, you can clearly see your plan in action, which is certainly satisfying when it comes to a management game. But even though I've played about 8 hours of it, I had a reasonable amount of fun, but I think it was really just me getting completely sucked into the whole management side of another management game. And I like management games. I do. I played so much Transport Tycoon Deluxe. I'm still terrible at it. I like to watch people's videos when it comes to Transport Tycoon Deluxe because they're way better than I am. And I'm always extremely impressed by the really complicated network of things that they've managed to put together. Can we at least upgrade this stuff so my trucks can actually go to reasonable speed? Thank you. There's little bits of problems that are kind of ruining some of my routes here just because we're using streets instead of country roads, which is a little bit annoying. I love that game to bits, but if I was looking for a similar experience, what I see with Train Fever is just a lesser experience. Train Fever doesn't do a huge amount of things better than something like Transport Tycoon Deluxe, which is a very old game right now, but it's being continually updated and supported to this day with the Project OpenTTD, which frankly is hard to compete with. 1, it's free. 2, it's got a ludicrous amount of development time behind it. It is a very well-polished game, and even though it still has some weird interface problems, it is a very, very solid transport simulator. This game does a decent job in some areas of the interface, and then in others it just kind of boggles my mind, frankly. And I would like to know why, if I wanted to, say, upgrade the road, why exactly it only lets me do it in little bits. What I'd like to be able to do instead of clicking. In this case, I'm able to actually upgrade this pretty well, which is nice. But if I start going to the town, it's going to do it in little bits, and I'm going to be clicking and clicking and clicking and clicking. It would be nice to have, like, a paintbrush of some description to mass upgrade roads and things like that, but the game doesn't really appear to have that. The game also has a similar problem with railroads. Once you gain electrification, which, by the way, it never tells you that you gain the ability to electrify things, it just kind of pops up in this menu and you just kind of notice it accidentally. You can only upgrade a bit at a time when it comes to the electric wires. I think it's got something to do with the chunks in which you built either the road or the railroad, but it would be nice just to have kind of a drag and drop. And for some reason, I can't upgrade my rails to high-speed tracks. It looks like I have to pull a whole lot out and start again, which is a problem that I continually have with the rail system. Because the rails cost so much, and there isn't an undo button, as far as I know. If there is, I haven't found it. I don't know where it is. It means that you can end up wasting millions of dollars trying to build this railroad system that just doesn't work because there's an arbitrary terrain collision. You have to redesign the entire damn thing around that. It's pretty infuriating, honestly. It's actually kept me away from the train system in this game. I've only got 2 running lines as a result, and they're both still losing money because of the bugs that we had with them. Just infuriating. I think the train's finally running, but, you know, Beaconsfield is tanked now. It used to be a reasonable hub, and now no one wants to go there, and it's the same with Hitchin as well, which is weird because Hitchin's moving a lot of buses around the place. So, yeah, there's no one on this train. Look at it. I mean, I'm losing so much. I'm losing $500,000 a year on this train because now the whole route is broken because of some arbitrary nonsense. Ugh. There's a few weird bugs here and there as well. When you're upgrading roads, it sometimes causes vehicles to teleport, and I'm not even sure what's going on with that. I've seen them lose passengers as a result of it as well. It's a bit hard to recommend in its current state. What I will say is that it has modding support. It looks like the team is actively trying to add content to the game. So I think maybe in a year or so, this game will be a lot easier to recommend once it has new content, once people have balanced things out, once they've made trains more viable in the early game, and once they've actually built a proper manual and tutorial to really explain a lot of the nuances that this game just expects you to find out randomly. And I read a bunch of guides on Steam. Some of them are questionable. Some of them seem to be good advice. I really shouldn't have to be digging around in the Steam forums in order to learn a game. The game should at least give me a manual or a reference guide or something that I can refer to when I need to, and a more comprehensive tutorial that covers basic concepts. The idea that the game says, hey, build a train, when actually what that's probably going to do is bankrupt you if that's the first thing that you do, is a little silly. You know, it should recognize that trains are not profitable in the early game from what I can tell, and just try and say, hey, build a route between 2 towns, instead of saying, well, build a couple of bus stops in the same town, which makes basically no money whatsoever. Distance seems to be the thing which really matters here. Do you have a full load? Are you going distance? Well, time doesn't seem to matter all that much, frankly. You can make a huge amount of money. This is my most profitable thing right now. These guys are taking about 3 months to reach Upper Spennymoor. They don't care. Upper Spennymoor's worth it, apparently, to them. I'm not even running modern buses on this line right now. These are some of the older ones. And this thing is still making a fortune. That just made $109,000 just doing that run. Yeah. I think if you're looking for a transport simulator and you've already played OpenTTD to death, I still wouldn't necessarily go out and say, hey, buy this for $35. I don't think in its current state it's worth it, but I do think it has a decent amount of potential. It's got a nice amount of detail. You know, it's a fairly nice-looking game considering. Reasonably high-resolution textures. I mean, good amount of detail here. Trees don't look terrible. I mean, look at that. That's actually surprisingly nice for a simulation game. Really, there's a random barrel there. That's pretty. You got your little individual guys wandering around the place, and the models are quite nice too, although occasionally they do disappear. There's not a huge amount of vehicles that you get throughout the game, especially considering that it goes over, what, 200 years of transport? This maybe should be a few more models of buses and trucks and trains here and there, but the ones that they look good. Well, they're pretty reasonable looking models. It's fairly hard to argue with them. And the satisfaction of getting a route together and really making it work and make a huge amount of money out of it is there. I think the line system is a really good way of doing things for the most part, but you still need, I think, this drag and drop interface, the ability to replace things without sending everything back to the garage and losing all of your passengers. Again, I heard there's a workaround, but the tutorial to the game never actually explains any of that, so that's something of a pain. And there's just a couple too many clicks on a lot of the actions. Things about the UI that could be really easily fixed. You know, why is there not a button here which says go to depot? Why do I have to click this and then that? That's unnecessary, especially when I'm trying to do it to maybe a group of vehicles. There doesn't seem to be a way of doing that. It opens up an individual window for each one. Just like, go to depot, line, go to depot, line, go to depot. It's bloody well fiddly, and that shouldn't really be the case. What would also be nice is if the vehicles remembered which line they used to be on once you send them to the depot, because it actually wipes the line data, so it's easy enough to send vehicles to a depot to replace them, then forget where the hell they were going in the first place. I'd also like them to make the landscaping a little bit more accurate. I can show you this, but this costs a reasonable amount of money. It's quite nice in the level of deformation that you can do, as you can see. That's pretty cool, but it's not perhaps quite as accurate, and it doesn't do a very good job of showing you relatively just what kind of contour and sort of slope that you've generated, and whether or not this is actually okay for a rail line until you decide to try and plunk one down there. It's also, frankly, a lot of money. I do think an undo button would actually benefit the game significantly, because you waste so much money on unnecessary landscaping and railway building that it becomes just a chore, frankly. The soundtrack is obviously aping Transport Tycoon as well. I don't hate it. It's nice, kind of cheesy. I think it would be better if it was Red Book audio, if you want to go a real blast from the past there. Man, those tracks in Transport Tycoon still... they're burned into my mind to this very day. And you know what? I'm not even mad about that. They were absolutely fantastic. But, yeah. It's a good attempt, but it's chasing after the legacy of games gone by that still have, for the most part, a lot more content and depth than this one does. It's made some strides in terms of its interface as well as its 3D rendering. But I still think building railway lines and things like Transport Tycoon Deluxe, even though it looks like you've got a lot more freedom to create the railway line that you want, it's very much more free form, the design system within TTD was much easier to not mess up. And it's very easy to mess up the construction of railway lines in this game. Roads are a bit more tolerant to that kind of nonsense, but railway lines in particular are just pains in the ass. And ultimately, if I don't have things like planes, if I don't have things like maglev and monorail and ships and a lot more industries and the ability to build my own industries and invest in towns and advertising campaigns, then really I'm just left with control over building routes and building stuff to go on those routes, which is just not quite enough to really keep me interested. Again, a solid start. Yeah, solid start. It has potential, absolutely. We really should upgrade this road, good lord. It has the potential. I think it's a fairly solid base, but a lot more is needed to really make it a compelling management sim, in my honest opinion, compared to its current competition. Which, admittedly, is obviously not that high, but it would be nice to see something that actually rivaled Transport Tycoon Deluxe, and I'm afraid at the moment Train Fever really doesn't. That doesn't mean it's a bad game, it's just that It's chasing the legacy of something which is very, very good. And unfortunately, that free game makes this one a bit redundant because the improvements are not really that significant, and the content that's missing is just too much to ignore. There you go, folks. Look at Train Fever. It's currently available on Steam for $35 or your regional equivalent. My name has been Total Biscuit. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.